You may have noticed something while watching movie trailers for upcoming releases. Every movie seems like it's either based on a book, a sequel, or yet another movie from a cinematic universe that never seems to stop expanding.
We were hoping it would stop on its own.
Well, I'm here to tell you that you're not just imagining things. One researcher looked at the top 10 grossing films in the US since 1977 and found that since 2010, over 50% of these films were prequels, sequels, spin-offs, remakes, reboots, or cinematic universe expansions.
What?
In 2021, only one movie in the top 10 was an original idea, the movie Free Guy with Ryan Reynolds.
That's a new one.
And this isn't happening because Hollywood has simply run out of new ideas. It boils down to three major shifts in the entertainment industry. Shifts that meant Hollywood needed to go in on movies with brand recognition. Original, great movies, even ones that audiences loved, became a riskier bet. For our purposes today, we'll call these shifts the three horsemen of the great original movie apocalypse. First, there is the horseman of consolidation.
Looks like we're shy of one horse.
You brought too many.
In the 1980s and 90s, antitrust laws that kept TV and communication networks from becoming too big and powerful were either repealed or not enforced. The number of major players in TV and entertainment began to shrink. Movie theater companies also consolidated, which gave rise to the multiplex theater in the 90s. In 1995, the top 5 movie chains owned a third of US theaters. By 2016, they owned over 53%. According to researcher Matt Stoller, these giant multiplex theaters jolted the Hollywood power structure. Movies now made most of their ticket sales in the first weeks, so there wasn't time for word of mouth. Brand recognition was the best way to draw audiences quickly. Then in the 2000s came the rise of streaming, and Hollywood became obsessed with gaining market share, taking big bets to grow as large as possible. But don't just take my word for it. Here's media mogul and Discovery board member John Malone.
There's no question that the equity markets right now are so interested in growth above all other criteria, and this is like the bubble in the late 90s through 2000. It's all about growth. This is a land rush.
Of course, the fastest way for a company to grow is to merge with another company.
The deal that everyone from Wall Street to Washington is abuzz about.
If approved, it would be one of the biggest media and technology mergers in history.
There are newer, bigger, more powerful kids on the block.
Over the past 12 years, mergers in the film and TV industry totaled over $400 billion in deal value.
Disney will acquire Fox Entertainment assets for $52.4 billion.
In 2017, just one of those mergers, the Walt Disney Company's acquisition of 21st Century Fox, created one company that controlled around 40% of the domestic box office and employed nearly 30% of TV and film writers. Consolidation in Hollywood has actually led to fewer films. After the Disney 21st Century Fox merger, Disney announced plans to cut Fox's film slate in half and remake a number of Fox films for Disney+. This consolidation makes it so it is harder for creators to break into the industry. There are not as many small to mid-sized films to cut their teeth on, and it gives them less options for places to sell their ideas. Then there is the horseman of vertical integration.
He not only plays, he can shoot too.
When it comes to original shows and films, a single streaming company like Netflix does what used to be done by multiple companies. For decades, the companies that showed movies to audiences, movie theaters, distributors, were owned by separate companies. This meant that theaters could decline to show a studio's movie if it didn't draw audiences and show another studio's movie instead. But today, one company, like Netflix, HBO, Apple, or Disney, decide what gets made and where it's shown. This gives them more control to decide who profits and who doesn't. And another thing streaming did was fundamentally change the value of content. Netflix only shares viewership data on its content when it wants to. Their business model doesn't require them to. TV networks, for instance, had to establish a market value for their content to know what to charge advertisers, and they had to share those ratings to get that price. Netflix doesn't have ads. And with the industry reforming itself around the streaming model, it's become difficult to determine the value of anything. And it starves out the marketplace where you would go to sell that content. And with no metrics and no marketplace, creators and roles across the industry are finding themselves with less control and less profit. At a time where demand for content is high, in our peak TV era, writer pay actually went down 14% over the last 5 years. This leads us to our third horseman, cutting out creatives.
You see, in this world, there's two kinds of people, my friend. Those with loaded guns and those who dig.
At first, the rise of streamers like Netflix opened up the market of ideas for creators. It paid them more upfront, it gave them more artistic freedom, but as the Netflix model became the model, even in-demand creators had difficulty negotiating ownership. In 2017, Netflix offered Michaela Coel $1 million for her show I May Destroy You, but Netflix refused to give her any rights. Coel chose to walk away.
You became aware when you had a deal offered to you of a huge amount of money that they were also going to try and take some of the copyright. Was that very hard for you to take that amount of control back and to say no to that amount of money?
Well, the first thing I asked was, why do you want to take all of the copyright? But just because I want transparency, you know? And when the answer is, that's just not the way it is, I'm already out. That doesn't sound like a good answer to me.
No.
You know, it sounds cloudy.
Without any intellectual property or financial stake in their work, creators and independent producers are basically reduced to contract players. So what's the point of creating something great if all the upside goes to a streaming giant? But the film and TV industry doesn't have to work this way. The UK is a great example of what can happen when monopolization of the entertainment industry is kept in check. In 2004, the British government created the Terms of Trade, a formal code that required the country's public broadcasters to commission 25% of their programming from independent producers, and to allow those producers to retain secondary rights to their work. It allowed UK producers to financially benefit from a successful show, and it gave American audiences a long list of programming. X Factor, Dancing with the Stars, Undercover Boss, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. The UK is now the second largest TV exporter in the world. In the first 4 years after the requirements went into effect, the income from selling the rights to these shows abroad grew 22% annually. And with these terms of trade, consolidation just wasn't as necessary. In 2017, of the companies that sold content to these broadcasters, 42% were small to mid-sized production companies. It is also easier for new talent to break into the television industry in the UK. From 2008 to 2017, about a third of new content sold annually to these channels were made by new entrants. On this side of the pond, there are major questions over whether the consolidation of Hollywood and the streaming model is sustainable. Wall Street investors are eager to see profitability after years of investment and growth. And writers, actors, and directors are fighting for terms within this new landscape that allow them the ability and the incentive to make great art. They are also fighting to make original ideas possible and profitable again. And the outcome of this fight could decide whether the next great original movie ever gets made at all.